Welcome to the Maine Outdoor Enthusiast podcast. I'm Paul.
And I'm Mark.
So we're going to talk a little grouse hunting today.
Grouse hunting or
and grouse populations.
Okay, yeah.
I throw you for a loop.
No, you didn't throw me for a loop.
No,
I knew her. And by the way, they're partridge.
Oh,
Yeah,
so in our world, they're partridge.
yeah.
What's the difference?
Well, a partridge is shot on the ground, and a grouse is shot out of the air. And I shoot most of my birds on the ground, so
That's not very ethical.
yeah. It's funny. I was raised. That's one of the things. From a young age, we partridge hunt, and back in the day, you never heard the word grouse from my father's generation.
No.
The word grouse was never. It was a partridge, or simply a bird.
Or patridge.
Yeah, that's down east. Yeah, down the southern part of the state. But that. So if you asked them what they were doing on the weekend or whatever, they wouldn't even say grouse hunting or partridge. Bird hunting, going bird hunting.
Yeah,
just simply bird hunting was, and
Yeah,
you knew what they were talking about.
When you think about that, it's kind of funny. I'm going bird hunting. What kind of birds you?
Yep, no, it went without saying. You knew what they were going to do. And
That reminds me, we were in Kittery Trading Post, and Lacey was looking for some stuff for Meadow.
yeah,
Which is our dog. And she goes up to the guy and she's like, I'm wondering where your dog hunting stuff is.
you can't hunt dogs.
The guy goes, our what?
Yeah.
She's like, I was like, stuff for
Hunting dogs.
a hunting dog.
Yeah.
She's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it does sound kind of funny when you
Yeah.
put it that way.
My sisters, when we would get back from hunting, and my sisters would always ask if we caught anything. Did you catch something?
You know,
Did you?
yeah,
Yeah. You catch a bird? Or
And
catch a deer?
that implies you can release it.
Yeah, which you can't.
And it's funny, non-hunters, when I was at college, they'd ask the same thing. I'd get back from deer camp. They'd be like, "Did you catch anything?"
Yeah,
I'm like, well,
yeah,
you're
Yeah.
implying that if I bag one, I can let it go.
yeah.
There's no returning it. If
No,
I
this
get
isn't
one.
fly fishing.
it's
No.
the end of the road.
No.
So I guess we're at this is episode 12.
Yeah. Dozen.
We're at a
Yeah.
dirty dozen.
Yeah. I don't know how dirty, but a
Well,
dozen.
no, it's pretty clean.
Yeah.
And we got some sunshine today.
Yeah. We had some
Holy
yesterday. It's funny you
It's
mentioned
still
that, Paul.
it's still poured though.
It rained so hard at the camp yesterday.
Yeah.
It rained so hard. I just drained the boat out and thought I was going to get by. The only time I've been in the boat this summer is to drain it. And
Yeah.
I thought I was going to get by, and it filled back up yesterday evening.
What's the water level?
It's about
like?
as high as I've ever seen it. This time of year, you get into August, late August, and usually it's the lowest it is all year for the year. And right now it is high. The water's high. Lots of water.
Well, then I wonder how the fall Fishing will
it
be-
bodes well for that. For
when the fish are spawning.
if we don't have a dry spell and the water stays up, it would make for good fall fishing up there.
I can't imagine having a dry enough spell that
Right,
this
reduce the
point
water
in the
that much.
game,
Yeah.
I was talking to some people that have places on other lakes, and they typically have a beach, and they have no beach.
No, it's high,
Right
Paul.
now.
It's extremely
up
high.
over one guy's up over his wharf actually.
It would be interesting, and I don't watch the news or anything, so I have no idea. It would be interesting to know our rainfall for the summer. And I haven't heard anything, but it must be like one of the wettest summers in a long time.
This afternoon I didn't have time, but I was thinking about getting on NOAA to go
Yeah.
just to see the past week,
Yeah,
because I feel like every day it's been
but it's not just this past
inches-
week.
no,
It's
but I
been
just-
the entire summer. That
just the past few days. It seems like every day it's like inches of rain.
yeah.
Not
And like I say, it didn't rain long yesterday, but
it
it
just
came
pours.
down. It poured. There was
pours.
water standing on the lawn,
well, I walk out back and it's like walking on a sponge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So,
well, I guess before we get too much into grouse hunting, one of the first things we can talk about is grouse populations in Maine, which we've always had a healthy population.
we've always
grouse,
had a
yeah.
lot of birds up here.
We've been fortunate. It's good habitat for birds, a lot of mixed growth,
Yeah.
mixed age growth.
Yeah.
So a lot of good habitat. there was a study that was done by some University of Maine grad students, 2014 through 2016. That was a pretty good study. You've read parts of it. You said.
Yeah, I've seen, and like I say, I've seen on TV that part of the study, and they radio collared them, the grouse.
They did.
They would net them and radio collar them.
They put these. Basically, it's like a necklace type.
Yeah.
Radio collar for birds, and it was pretty interesting. So, what they did was, again, there's some grad students. The idea behind it is Maine didn't really have any studies done like that. The other states had. So they're trying to get an idea of what survival rates are like in the state.
Well, and I think too, Paul, the effect, when I was a kid, the grouse season was short. It didn't even go through deer season. It ended like halfway through deer season.
You're right.
And so they expanded it to the end of December. And I guess they really wanted to get a handle on the effect that may have had on the population because that's something they can control hunting.
Correct. So they're going to get an idea of what just general survival rates were like in the state. So if you could stratify them for seasonality, because there's variations amongst the season as far as what stresses them out. So severe weather, snowpack. At fall time, they transitioned from foraging on the ground to foraging in the trees.
Exactly.
Nesting, puts them at risk, stuff like that. Predation was another one. And then, so ultimately, they really wanted to look at hunting, what effect hunters have on it. And then you're right, particularly that late season, because they're going from foraging on the ground to foraging into the trees.
Which we call budding up here.
And then
they bud. So
you've got severe weather coming, increased snowpack. So does extending the season, is that going to be detrimental to the population? Another way it could be termed, is it going to be compensatory? So in other words, the birds you take, we're going to die anyway.
Right.
So if you look at overall survivability of the birds, what was taken during hunting season didn't change the overall survival.
Basically had no effect on population.
It just all came out in the wash by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Or are you going to add more stress to the population and take birds that wouldn't normally be taken? So it's pretty neat study. And we'll just kind of go over it real quick. But like I said, other states had looked at this in the past.
Right.
And we really haven't. And it's kind of interesting when you look at Maine, and they've done well with a lot of things like that. And I think it's partially, like if you look at like native brook trout, we still have healthy native brook trout populations. But I think it's because we're kind of like one of the last states to get developed and to get influenced like some of the other states. And you can kind of learn from how other states have messed up.
Right.
Because if you look at the grouse populations across the U.S., they're kind of all throughout the northern U.S. into Canada. But when you get to the southern edge of that border, you'll see declining populations right now. And it mostly has to do with loss of habitat.
Right.
And Ohio is one that comes up a lot, that they've had a pretty severe declining population, I guess, of grouse. So, ultimately, we don't want to end up in that situation. We got a good population now. Any idea what the grouse population is in the state?
Maybe 750,000 in that area. Half to 750,000 grouse.
Some of that. So there isn't really a concrete number. Some of the stuff I read was like between 1 and 1.5 million.
Oh, is there? Yeah.
Because I know some of the harvest rates in previous years, like early 80s, I believe it was, like they're saying like 500,000 birds.
Yeah, I think I read that.
Were harvested somewhere up to 750,000.
Yeah, maybe that's what I was thinking of, the harvest rates and stuff.
That's a lot of birds.
That's a lot of birds.
But I think it's very hard to quantify because of the way they're hunted.
Yeah.
You don't have to tag them or report them or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I think it'd be something very hard to quantify. But yeah, so a really healthy grouse population. Hunting's the only variable that we really can control. So we can't control predation. We can't control, I should say human variables. Hunting probably the biggest, but also effects on habitat. if we're
Right.
destroying habitat. But, you know, we can't control the weather, can't control predation, stuff like that.
Right.
So, but we can control hunting.
Right.
So it's good to have some sort of idea, some sort of number.
Right.
So I guess, how did they go about doing this? They basically selected 2 study areas. And of course, this was at the University of Maine at Orono. So one area was the Stud Mill Road, just outside of Orono. I think it was approximately 25,000 acres. Was that first study area. The second one was Fry Mountain.
Yeah.
Substantially smaller. I think it was about 5,000 acres. And it was state-owned land managed by Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, I believe.
Yeah.
And they managed it specifically for upland bird hunting.
Yeah.
Stud Mill Road was popular. I mean, back when I was in college down there, that's all the college kids that hunted. That's where you would go to
Stud Mill Road. Yeah.
go bird hunting. If
It
you had a
has-
few hours after class before
Yeah.
dark.
Now that heads out towards Kalispell, out towards Washington County. I think.
I'd have to look
Yeah.
at a map to see specifically where it
Yeah.
goes. But yeah, we shot birds out there.
Yeah.
And it was pretty cool. I don't know if they do this anymore, but we used to keep our guns at public safety
Oh yeah.
right there at the end of
Right on
campus.
campus, yeah.
So you check your guns in and out. And yeah, if we had time after class or Saturday, if I wasn't coming home,
Yeah.
that's usually where we'd go.
Now, it's funny you talk about shooting birds down there. I can remember, and this is a lot of years ago. This was back in the 70s or 80s, talking to people that lived down around Bangor, and they never shot a bird on the ground down there because they never. I mean, it was just they were they were so hard to get.
Yeah.
It was a different animal down there.
You see that here.
Yes, you do.
just
Yeah, even
locally.
where we hunt around the camp compared to the big woods we call it. There's a big difference.
Up in the big woods, they'll stay put. They'll look at you.
Yeah.
And just kind of sit there and stay put. Up around the lakes and stuff.
Generally they don't do that.
Boys,
You'll
you
get the
can
occasional bird that'll hold tight, but generally they're
You can be upwards
skittish,
of a half mile away,
and they're gone.
coming around the corner, and they just nose right out straight, running on a dead
Either
run.
that or take off.
Or take
flying.
off.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of days where you see a lot of birds,
But I get very few.
and your percentage isn't very.
No.
isn't
Not
very
up
good.
around the lakes.
No. It's different for sure. Although it's kind of changing a little bit up in the woods.
Yeah, it is. They've been under a lot of pressure here the last 20 years and stuff. And
We've talked about the moose season probably contributing to
a lot of
to
people
that.
coming up and
people that come up and go moose hunting kind of realize how good the
the
bird hunting is, and
yeah.
they'll start doing some bird hunting.
Yeah.
So so back to that study, they had 2 areas, obviously different sizes, but they're roughly the same as far as predation's concerned. So they try to match them up pretty evenly for that. So they captured them. Yeah, they had some sort of cage set up that they used to capture the grouse.
Kind of a net to funnel them into that cage, and a ground net along the ground that would kind of funnel them into that cage.
Yeah, and then they banded them, then also put a necklace type collar,
Radio collar on it.
that let out a radio frequency that they could track these birds with. And I believe if that collar didn't move for 8 hours,
Right.
the beep that it would let out sped up or slow down. I forget which one, but it changed the frequency and how
So they knew that it was
and they knew
dead.
that it's either dead or it came off or something like that.
Yeah.
Wasn't moving. So after 8 hours, it would change its response, and they would know that probably the bird was dead. So they assessed the birds for age.
Mm-hmm.
So less than 1 year of age, they considered a juvenile. Older than 1 was an adult. Assessed them for sex and weight. If the birds were less than a certain weight, they wouldn't collar them.
Too much stress on it. Yep,
Yeah, I believe
that
if
makes
the
sense.
collar was greater than 3% of the bird's weight,
Yeah.
it was a risk of
Right.
stressing the bird and killing it. They also they censored their data for like the first 6 days after collaring the birds, just in case if birds died. For the
Right.
first 6 days, it probably was the stress from handling
Right.
and collaring them. They had 248 grouse
Mm-hmm.
that they ended up collaring and studying. So their total data set or their sample population was 248 grouse. 136 were males. I think it was like 112 were females. And in the males and females side, They both were about 50% juveniles, 50% adults.
Mm-hmm.
I will say it's kind of skewed about 20% more to males versus females. So that might affect some outcomes. It was funny. So over the course of 3 years, there were 43 grouse that were killed by hunters. So 37 of them were reported. 2 were not reported.
Mm-hmm.
What they did is on those bands and on the collars, they had a number that they could call if they shot the grouse. Then there was 4 that were shot and not recovered.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe a wing shot, something like that, or someone couldn't find it.
Right.
The 2 that were shot and not reported, they found one hanging over a tree limb.
Yeah.
So someone must have cleaned it and just hung the necklace up over the tree limb. Interestingly enough, so October, of the 43 in October, 26 were killed in October. You had 7 in November and then 10 in December. And so there's a lot of, we'll get more into that here in a second, but there's probably a lot of reasons why. Is first of all, October, that's kind of when everyone goes bird hunting.
Right.
Once November hits, more people are deer hunting.
Right.
Less focused on bird hunting. And same thing in December. Some of the other factors, as far as early in October is a lot more juveniles are out and about. And those are the ones that typically get
and that
shot.
would fit into we shoot most of our birds in October.
Early on.
It would fit into how we, what we experience.
And then once you get into December, you're not only, probably less hunters, but you're limited on areas you can hunt.
Right.
If the snowpack is up, you can't get out into some of the places that you normally would at the beginning of October. So additional mortality. So outside of hunters, there was 54 during the hunting season, 46 during the winter, and then 35 spring and summer.
Now, they didn't they determine that avian predation was the highest?
So we'll get to that here in a minute.
I'm jumping ahead of you.
Yeah, no, and that's fine. So obviously highest survival, as I mentioned, was during the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Lowest was October, but if you get rid of October, it was kind of the winter months when weather's severe, high snowpack.
Well, didn't a lot of snow, isn't that an advantage to the grouse as far as snow roosting and stuff like that?
Yeah, and I got an interesting story about that. They didn't really address that.
Yeah, because I've read articles on that, and that some years when there's a lot of snow, the survival's good because of that. The snow roosting, it helps them with predation. And
I think it's about once
surviving cold
once
weather.
there's at least 10 inches of snow, they can snow roost. Yeah. And actually, I got a story about out back here this past winter. I was taking a walk out back, snowshoeing with the kids. And last year we were seeing quite a few partridge out back here. And I was walking out through the woods and I could see where a partridge had landed on the snow, and it hadn't clicked in my head yet. I just was curious. I walked over, looked like he walked maybe a foot, and there was a divot in the snow. So I'm like, oh, look where a partridge landed. And I'm like, I don't see where he went from there. And I literally, when I went to step down right beside where he came right out of the snow, right between my legs, scared the living daylights out of me.
Yeah, I've never had that happen.
Because he had gone.
I've seen where they've snow roosted.
Yeah, so he'd gone maybe a foot or 2 feet from where he went into the snow.
Yeah.
And then went over about 2 feet. Yeah. And he shot up out of the snow just like a rocket.
Yeah.
It reminded me of like a nuclear sub.
Yeah, coming up out of the...
shooting like a intercontinental ballistic missile out of the water. Yeah. I mean, it just shot up out of the snow. It was pretty crazy. The kids were like, what was that? Yeah. Scared the living daylights out of me. So the harvest rate, you take the average of those 3 years, was about 16%.
Yeah.
And that was comparable with other states. Some states were quite a bit higher.
I was thinking it was around 15% as far as hunter.
So they had, for those 3 years, 16%.
Yeah.
One interesting thing is, and I wish I saw they had the actual numbers in the study. They didn't say how many birds they trapped from either area.
Yeah. I'm
not going to assume it's equal because the hunter success rate in the Fry Mountain area was like twice that of the Stud Mill Road. And there was one hunter in particular that they mentioned in that Fry Mountain, that area, that accounted for 45%
wow
of the birds harvested.
Wow. Yeah.
So that kind of was like, but yeah, so hunter success rate there was like twice that of stud male. But overall survival, when they ran all the numbers, came out the same.
Yeah.
It came out as basically equal.
Yeah.
But yeah, hunter success rate was different. So it makes you wonder, you know, different types of hunters going to these places, maybe slightly different woods they're hunting.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Population densities, you know, I wish they would have mentioned, you know, maybe there was more grouse at Fry Mountain versus the Stud Mill Road. A lot denser of a population. So after they looked at, you know, hunter success rate, the percentage taken by hunters, they looked at other sources of mortality. And you'd mentioned avian predation.
Yeah, I think that's,
So that was predominantly...
That's the major driver.
So hawks, owls, stuff like that. It actually was probably skewed in their study, the way that they would decide whether it was done by an avian or a mammalian predator. It probably was skewed even more towards mammalian predators. So the actual numbers of the
may have been higher
for avian because you would get birds that probably were killed by what they call a raptor, avian predator, but a mammal that's a scavenger had come along and got the bird.
Right.
So it was counted towards, you know, so it's probably even higher than what they reported in the study.
Yeah.
And it makes me think of the past few years, we've seen a lot of hawks.
Along the roads. When you're driving down the dirt roads. I've never seen
as many as we have the past couple of years. It seems like every corner you come around, there's a hawk coming down on the road.
Yeah, coming out of a tree.
Overall, again, I like stuff like this. It was really interesting. So I guess overall, you know, what's the big takeaway is that it's not conclusive that hunters have a compensatory effect.
Right.
But it does suggest that.
Yeah.
Clearly suggests that.
Yeah.
Because, it all came out in the wash.
Yeah.
In the end, that survival rates were the same.
One of the things, and it's not this study, but I've read in studies from other states years ago, Paul, was they would go in and they would try to do population studies, and they would go into an area that, you know, maybe it was a park or a federal park, and there was no hunting allowed, and then did they mention that in that study?
So they kind of did. So one of the downfalls with a study like this, first of all, and we'll address that, is it's an observational study. So there's a lot of what they'll call selection bias that can kind of crop up in these.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you know, you want everything randomized. You want to try to account for as many confounding variables as possible.
Yeah.
So you have like both populations that you're sampling are equal as far as sex, age, maybe population densities, hunting pressure. And if you just, you know, if you want to do a study like this that can really start to show you something, is you got to have somewhat of a control group. And that's kind of what you're talking about, is you have basically an identical population that you're going to look at that has no hunting.
Right.
And then another population in kind of an identical area, try to make everything the same. And then you have hunting. And then basically you have only those two variables that you have isolated. And it's very hard to do, especially something like this. You know, to have a randomized, it really can't be blinded.
Right.
And you kind of want
there's a lot you can't control.
You want some sort of control group.
Yeah.
Versus an active group.
Yeah.
So some states do that. And that would give you some better insight.
And what I remember, and these are a long time ago, that they found that basically the populations, there was no difference year in and year out. There was just as many birds where they were being hunted as there were in a place there was no hunting.
Yeah.
And so that's where Maine get in when they found these things out, that hunting wasn't really affecting the population, that they said, well, we can increase opportunity to hunt.
Yeah.
Instead of having it 4 weeks, we'll go
Into
we'll
the
go
end of
12
December.
weeks.
Yeah.
October, November, December.
Yeah.
We'll go 12 weeks because you have an opportunity at least to go out and hunt, and you're not really affecting a population. And that is really, like I say, why, when I was a kid, I think it may have been 4 weeks, the grouse season. And now we're up to 12 weeks.
Was it just October when you were a kid?
I know that it shut down sometime in November during deer season.
Okay.
Whether that was halfway or at the very beginning, I don't remember. But I could tell you a story about a deer hunter, that a friend of the family, that he was walking back to camp and he shot a grouse in the camp driveway. It was in November, and he get pinched.
Season was closed?
The season was closed. Yeah. So I do know that it was closed and I used to deer hunt. We didn't shoot any birds during deer season. We would have if we, and so I'd have to go back into the 60s and 70s and see what the grouse season. I'm sure we could find that out. Yeah. But and I don't know if in this study if it talks about that, a major player in grouse population is the breeding season. It's how well what the weather's like when they breed.
Which they
nesting season, I should say.
Yeah, they just mentioned that as a stressor, as they were looking at how do times of the year, if you had hunting seasons overlapping, more stressful times on the population, is that going to be a no-go?
Right.
No, they didn't mention the specifics.
Because that what we know now is that's probably the biggest determination of what our fall season is going to look like as far as grouse is.
This fall isn't looking.
No,
I hope I'm wrong.
If you have a cold, wet spring, it doesn't bode well for the grouse population.
And I can't find any place yet that's been addressed.
Yeah.
I think the Bangor Daily had an article in there back in June or July, but I don't get the Bangor Daily, so I don't have access to it.
Yeah.
But just going from our own observations and talking to other people.
Yeah.
And just what we saw this spring.
Yeah. And that can be regional too, because maybe in some parts of the state the weather was better, in some parts it was worse. So your population may differ from.
There's been so many years that you hear a report that it's going to be a terrible year, cold, wet spring, and we're shooting birds like crazy.
Yeah,
and it's like you kind of want to say, well, God, they don't know what they're talking about. And then you have a year where they're saying, oh, it's going to be a good hunting year, and you're like, oh God, I'm not really shooting that many. So I don't think it's like you said. I don't think it's so much that whoever it is that's giving the report doesn't know what they're talking about. It's more, it can vary from
wait and see,
region to region. Yeah,
go regardless.
That's right.
Get out and go, and you get what you get.
Yeah, because it's fun no matter what.
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah, that's that.
So yeah, I guess some of the other things with this is I wonder if some of the locations they pick to study these birds, locations of convenience.
Obviously,
rather than, because you wonder how this, can be extrapolated to like northern Maine.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of areas you would suspect that a grouse isn't going to get hunted.
Yeah.
If they have, a maximum territory of 3 acres or whatever.
Yeah.
Most of them are like an acre or whatever.
And that's a surprising thing for people, just how small their area is. And they said the males were even smaller than the females, I think. And they said that a male may not move from his drumming log more than 600 or 800 feet in his entire life. So.
I've read some things that have said basically like an acre.
Yeah.
I know in another one that I read recently, they said up to 3 acres.
Yeah.
So yeah, not very far.
No, not very far.
Even
the young are far more,
Even when the juveniles disperse, though, it's still
right.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not extensive by any means.
No.
So the other thing that kind of caught me by surprise though was I figured more birds would have been lost to hunters shooting and not finding. It was less than 10%.
Yeah.
Granted, the number of birds that their sample size was very small relative to, I got to assume, the population.
The overall population.
I got to assume there's, obviously that's a drop in the bucket compared to the total number of birds that are in those areas. And So yeah, less than 10%. I would have expected. You know,
maybe more. Yeah.
more birds killed.
Yeah.
And not found.
Yeah.
Just because it's easy to do, even if you shoot one and it's just
we know they can be tough and they can be hard to find.
Even if you make a a perfect shot and their wings flap there for 10, 15 seconds, they can cover themselves with leaves and be under a log in no time.
I've told you the story that a couple of years ago I shot one and if I hadn't seen right where it went, it was running. I broke the wing. I shot it on the wing. So this was a grouse. And
that's right. It changes the whole.
Yeah. And
so this was a grouse.
He went over a log and it was all open underneath. I was in a regen type of all spruce. And he just disappeared. And I went over to where I last saw him, and there was a hole in the ground underneath a spruce tree. And that bird had gone in that hole, and I started digging in the ground and found that bird buried, completely buried.
Did you go clear to your armpit, or was it?
Oh, it was amazing. I looked in there, and I broke the ground down on the top of it. I could kind of cave it in.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And there's my bird. He was all covered with dirt because it all came. And I picked him. I couldn't believe it. So that tells you how easy.
Yeah.
He went into a hole that there's no way I would have, if I hadn't known exactly where he was, if I hadn't seen him, I'd never found that bird.
Yeah, those are times that a dog will come in handy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, a dog would have found it easy, would have. Yeah. But so I think back to the birds that I've lost, Paul, and I've gone and I've seen them run in the wind. You go in and you can't find them, and they could be anywhere. I mean, they can crawl. There's a lot of holes in the ground. A lot of
crevices and stuff for them to disappear.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. So yeah, that was like I said, I like studies like that, and that was an interesting one that, wasn't perfect. Yeah. And they mentioned that, it's not 100% conclusive.
Right.
But it does suggest that in other states have done the same thing. And
well, I think it answers a lot of questions that we have, Paul. We just never really knew anything.
No.
I mean, like I say, there's never been any studies done. So, I mean, we're guessing on a lot of things.
Yeah.
How they're dying and stuff, and just guessing on how.
So, one of the things, avian predation, I would have never guessed was at the top of the list.
Yeah.
You would think some sort of mammal.
Yeah. And I would have thought hunters being more than 16% of the population, and so killing more than 16% of the population.
Well, we've thought about it, especially when you get into the big woods, the areas that you can't hunt. I know tracking deer, and I don't know why. Maybe other people have the same sort of luck, but I don't know how many times I've been getting close to a deer and have a sneaking partridge right in front of me, and I'm thinking, don't flush.
Yeah.
Please don't. And he's looking at me, the head's going back and forth. And I've had partridge mess up a few hunts.
Yeah.
Things take off, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And so you figure I'm in the middle of the woods, middle of nowhere. That bird,
he's safe.
Yeah, he's not from a hunter.
From a hunter, he's he's
not going to get.
There's a lot of woods out there that a hunter never steps foot in when you get into that 3.5 million acres of land out there.
And I see a lot of birds tracking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just the middle of nowhere. So I mean, we're basically hunting the edges when we're bird hunting.
Yeah.
Old logging roads. We walk a lot of old roads.
Yeah.
And some drivable roads. We like to get out and walk a lot.
Yeah.
And so I never would have thought.
No.
So if anyone's interested in reading the study you're going through it, I'll put a link in the description below. It was done by Samantha Davis and some other students. I believe they're all grad students that did this. They did it in conjunction with the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. So University of Maine at Orono. And I'll put a link in the description. And if someone's bored enough and wants to read 30 or 40 pages of...
I found it, I had actually seen the study, Paul. I didn't really look at it hard, but I'd known about the study because I love bird hunting and stuff. Yeah. And I had seen that they had done a study, and so I was interested enough in it to
peruse through it, or at least read the abstract, get an idea of what's what.
Get the the summary, you know. I didn't read it word for word because there was a lot to read, but I got the gist of it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe they'll do some more studies like that.
Yeah. And also, Paul, in that too is moose was the same way. They really, I mean,
they didn't have a handle on the moose population.
No, they had no idea. They had no idea what the population was in the state years ago. They had done no studies. They really, they relied a lot, I think, on studies from other states or provinces from Canada and stuff that they really didn't know what was what with the moose population. Yeah. They had very little to do with the whole moose deal anyway. That was just a product of all the cutting practices that they, back in the 70s and 80s, the clear cutting.
Habitat became prime.
They made prime habitat, and the moose population was unreal in the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s. I
can remember then. I mean, you wouldn't go a day.
Oh, you could see a lot of moose. When I was a kid
up in the North Maine woods without seeing a moose.
Yeah, yeah.
Multiple moose.
You know, they were saying back then, it's funny, before they'd done any studies and stuff and population surveys, they had said, well, there's about 30,000 moose. And there was so many moose when they were saying this. And then when the moose populations, and they started doing studies, and now all of a sudden they're saying there's 70,000 moose, and we had far fewer moose than we did when they were saying we had 30,000 moose. They had no idea.
No, and I think the hunters back then knew, or at least the ones that,
and spend any time in the
connect
field.
The dots. Yeah. They're like, okay,
there's a lot more than 30,000 moose. There was.
And you'll hear
knew that just out of personal experience.
Yeah.
It was,
and you'll hear those guys talk nowadays, that holy smokes. Like, we could have been taking a lot more moose.
Yeah.
And, you have a population that's overpopulated.
We did.
Has a way.
It was way overpopulated.
It'll correct itself.
It did.
And here we sit.
Yeah.
You think of the deer hunting.
Yeah.
Remember the Milk River?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. You can't stack them up.
That clearly was, I remember watching hunting videos.
Yeah,
out in the Milk River.
Yeah,
and it was just
nature will even
herds of deer.
Yeah,
and they had a wicked kill.
Yeah,
when was
EHD
it'll all work itself out, and
it does
in the end.
It will
if you're not careful. And it's hard to do. You're trying to manage this stuff with like grouse hunting. You've got basically one variable you can control.
Right.
And you go too far one way, it could be, if everything else lines up perfectly, bad conditions environmentally, and then you combine that with a bad hunting practice.
Yeah.
Maybe it's survivable for a few years, but then you have that perfect storm, and then boom, you're behind the eight ball.
Yeah, I did read in one thing, and I can't remember what state it was in their grouse study, that they'd had a winter, then I think it was an ice, and the birds couldn't get to their feed, which was buds in the trees.
Right, that would make sense.
And there was a big die-off that winter, starvation. Because the grouse will seldom starve to death or freeze to death. The grouse will...
Which is amazing, because winters are harsh.
Yeah.
And I remember we were buying chickens, and when Lacey, that was kind of Lacey's deal. She was going through and picking... the right variety that was hardy for this area. And she was telling me, she's like, basically the birds that we've got coming, they can survive with really no shelter.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, how the heck is a chicken going to survive minus 40? Then I'm sitting there going, well, partridge do it. And a lot of other birds. So
very seldom do, they do occasionally starve to death, but very, very few. There's a lot of feed, but in those circumstances where you might have a big ice storm and your branches and your buds are coated and they can't get to them, then they would starve. Another interesting thing too, Paul, is the way they're built, their pre-gut there, they can feed within like just a few minutes.
Okay, yeah.
They can fill that crop, and which makes them less vulnerable to predation because they're not exposed. They get out, eat real quick, and then get to cover.
If you've ever, during deer season, sat along a road,
they come out quick and they're gone.
You'll see a partridge if a year with no snow and unseasonably warm, kind of watching especially if it's an old gravel road or something.
He doesn't know you're there.
No,
One of the few
you'll
times
see a partridge come out and like literally come out real quick, and then gone. Yeah, and then maybe that afternoon you'll see him again.
Yeah.
And you have time to think about that stuff, and you're like, boys, when I see a bird, I'm driving down the road.
He's not there long.
No, I'm just happening to
at the right time.
Catch him right at those few moments. He's there.
You're right, because they don't spend a lot of time. They're open.
No,
they're exposed, and they don't like being exposed because everything's out to eat them. So, including us.
And you're right. You'll see them if you've got a road that has alders hanging over it.
Yeah,
they get those alders over their head.
They feel a little more secure.
Their attitude totally changes.
Yeah,
they're less likely to dart and take off. And there was something else I wanted to say about. Oh, one thing at least with birds and other animals that are lower on the food chain, they tend to be able to bounce back pretty quick.
Yeah,
if something like that happens.
Yeah, well, they're
pretty resilient. They're basically there as nature's food.
Yeah,
for other animals. It's part of the that life cycle. So
that is because they produce a lot.
They do.
They can lay up to like 14 eggs or whatever. So they can reproduce.
Well, they've got a lot of animals depending on them.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's one other wives' tale. We're going to kick the hornet's nest here a little bit.
Are we talking about
you know what I'm going to say. You know what I'm going to say because I read a study on that too. It's never been documented where they had
can't have two broods.
They cannot have two broods. No. The only way they can have,
they could lay a second clutch.
They can lay
lose the first one.
But that's if every one of the first ones is destroyed. They will. But the numbers, I think they said it's they nest May, early June. 24 days, the eggs take to incubate. Then I think, 12 to 14 or 14 to 6 weeks
sounds about right.
before they disperse.
Yeah.
So they
can fly within,
just a few days.
3 days?
Yeah. Yeah, just a few days.
If I recall off the top of my head.
Yeah, it looks funny because you see them. We've seen them many times.
They're a little fluffy thing.
Little fluffy thing. They fly.
It doesn't look like.
Yeah.
And I've been attacked a lot during fishing season.
Yeah, they'll hiss and
Yeah. There was one you were putting your fly rod right.
She was my fly rod right on top of them.
And that was actually one particular spot that I'd several times had been. And usually I'm hiking in and out of a pond pretty quick, so I'm not paying attention. Right. I'm on a mission. And there was one, I was with a buddy, and it was raining out actually, so I had rain gear on, and that's all you can hear. The summer day, there was actually no wind, but you just hear that shh in the woods.
Yeah.
And I'm hoofing her right along, and gosh, out of the corner of my eye, I see something coming straight at me, and I just ducked my head, and my buddy was laughing because he said, I still didn't know what it was for about a minute or so afterwards. And he saw the whole thing. He was walking behind me, and he said this partridge flew off the bank right at me, and it didn't hit me, but he's like, it did like a somersault over my shoulder, and then landed on the ground.
Yeah,
and he was running like a little girl because the minute it hit the ground, it looked right at him and put his head right out. He's running down the. Yeah, he's like, "Geez, and. Then I look up, and I could see all these little birds flying through the trees. And in that same spot, that was where we were walking out one afternoon, I think it was.
Yeah.
And she was hissing at you.
Oh, she right from...
And you put your fly rod right out on her.
And my fly rod was broken down.
Yeah, so
it was no longer than 4 feet. And I put my fly rod right on top of her back. And she hissing just like a snake or something. She was wound up. Yeah. That was the same spot, going into a fly fishing only pond.
That's happened a lot.
Yeah.
Anything else regarding bird season?
No. I look forward to it,
It'll be here pretty soon.
So like I said,
time to start doing some skeet shooting.
Some of that. Yeah, we as you were to raise doing that. It's your introduction, a child's introduction in northern Maine into hunting is usually with with birds and stuff.
Great way to break a kid in.
Partridge.
Yep. Great way to. I mean, Lydia shot one with a 22.
That was amazing.
Sight.
At 8 years old.
She's a little 22 with a peep sight.
No, at 7 years old she did it, and then she did it again at 8 years old.
Yeah, she wasn't quite comfortable shooting a shotgun with
Yeah.
significant recoil. And it was actually a little heavy, front heavy for her. But she had a little Savage 22 with a peep sight.
Cricket.
Yeah, no, Rascal.
Okay,
Savage.
Rascal,
We were out back practicing there. I'd take apples off the apple tree and put them up. They'll explode if you shoot them.
Yeah.
Hit them right dead center.
Yeah.
So I was surprised with, that little peep sight. She'd sit there and shoot those apples off. And so we were up. There was a bird along the side of the road. And I'm like, all right, let's get out. You can shoot. And she walks up and and of course I'm backing her up and I'm thinking, all right, thing's going to fly. Because I'm thinking, there's no way, freehand. She was quite a ways away.
Yeah.
And I should have had more confidence in her. But yeah, so I'm getting ready. Bird's going to fly up and I'm going to shoot it.
Yeah.
And she fires and it falls over.
Yeah.
I was like, holy smokes, nice shot. I'm like, I don't know if I could have made the shot.
Yeah. I can remember my first bird that I shot. And I can remember my first bird when I was alone, my dad let me go down the side road. We were out walking on tote roads and he let me go by myself. And I remember I just got away from he and my brother and probably not more than 5 minutes. And I come around the corner and there's one standing just a few feet in front of me in the road. And I shot that, and I was so proud. I ran all the way back to where they were to show them that I got a bird on my own. I was well under 16. I wasn't old enough to be on my own, but we were way back in the woods, and he let me walk down a side road by myself. And I was so proud of that. I ran all the way back, just as fast as I could go to catch them.
Those milestones are pretty big.
Yeah,
for a kid.
Yeah, I had taken it on my own. So
we saved Lydia's. We've saved a few of the feathers off the tails off the birds for her.
And the first one I ever shot, I've showed you at the camp there, that little patch of woods between the two camps.
That was right off a dock, wasn't it? Or something?
Yeah. Our neighbor had a dock it was just a wooden dock that he used to pull his boat up on. He leaned it up against the trees there, just a few trees between our camp and his camp, and. The bird was sitting in there. Gun was in the camp. We come in Saturday afternoon after picking potatoes. Saw the bird when we pulled in the driveway, but the gun was in the camp, and we were pulling a fire drill trying to get the camp unlocked, get the gun out of the gun case, and get a shell into it. And I leaned against the camp there to shoot the bird with an old 410. Yeah,
but you still have that 410.
Still do, yeah. Yeah, single shot 410.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was my grandfather's, my father's. Now I've got it. So
yeah, it's pretty neat.
Yeah, I'm almost 65, and I remember that those two things. The first bird I ever shot, and I was with my brother and father, and then the first bird I ever shot on my own when I was on my own. There was no one around, and I can picture those.
I'm trying to remember the first one I shot on my own.
Yeah. I picked that bird up, Paul, and I ran, like I say, as fast as I could back to where I'd left them, and
just to show them.
Look
what I got.
I knew they'd heard the shot, so.
Well, when you're a kid too, distance is different. You probably thought you were a long ways away, but
took me about 10 minutes to run back,
just around the corner.
Yeah.
So. Alrighty. Well, there. I guess that just about sums it up.
Yeah.
Unless something else pops in your head.
No,
I better hurry up.
Something's always popping in. You better close it out because something's always popping into this noggin. So I might get myself into trouble here. I've already
might offend someone.
Yeah, so
don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So, all right. So until next time, get outside.
It's good for the soul.
See ya.